This is Sangeetha with the Indo-American Association, and we are here with comedian Rajiv Satyal. Hi, Rajiv.
Hi, Sangeetha. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So excited to have you. Let's start off by learning a bit about you.
I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, born and raised. My parents moved there from Punjab. Well, really from India largely, but we're Punjabi. And I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, spent 30 years of my life there.
Is there a stand-up scene in Cincinnati, like a big one?
There is. Stand-up has evolved so much, but at the time, it was really big in the 80s and 90s before I started. And it's funny because I remember this comic came in from New York, and he said, well, what's the scene like today? I just go, the scene, there are like 2 clubs. He goes, are you kidding? We used to start in New York. He had like a full New York accent. We used to start in New York, and we used to drive, and we would hit Jersey, and then we would hit Philly, and we would spend the night. We would go to Pittsburgh, we would go to Cleveland, and our ultimate destination was Cincinnati. We'd hit 8 clubs here, and then we would drive back. I'm like, is this a movie? Are you joking? He goes, no, the scene was really something here in Cincinnati. So it really collapsed in the 90s because of cable TV that affected all of the stand-up scene where people just really started watching it on cable. And then it slowly crept back up. And now there are multiple clubs, multiple rooms. You can get up, I don't know about 7 days a week, but pretty darn close.
Do you go back and perform?
I do. I love to perform in Cincinnati. It'll always be home. That'll always be where my heart is, I think. And I do Go Bananas, the Funny Bone. Go Bananas Comedy Club is where I started, so I always try to perform there. And I love it. I've performed all over Cincinnati, and it's a great place.
Let's start talking about your process, your approach to comedy. What inspires your writing process?
It's whatever comes to me. I mean, I think it is definitely me in the world, like my thoughts. It's about being Rajiv, I think, to an extent. But yeah, it is very much jokes. I mean, like I get out there to do a setup and punch act as opposed to like a rant or whatever. I mean, there will definitely be some of that. And I love kind of going off, and I think that's fun. But I write jokes. To me, I think those are why you do stand-up. And so I enjoy doing that. It is more probably internal than external. I mean, observational, when you first start out, it's almost like you're doing it in the second person. It's almost like you say, hey, you know when you go do that? So that's really in the second person. But as you get more and more experience, you're doing it more in the first person of, hey, the other day I was doing this, and your act becomes more about what it's like to be you.
How has your comedy evolved since you first started out?
I would say that I am less afraid about telling the crowd what I really think. I don't even mean about politics and religion or heavy stuff, but just even confessional things where you're like, okay, I'm just going to say that. And, you know, those are the things that really resonate with people when you think of the things that you're maybe afraid to say. And then people go, oh, I was thinking the same thing. Because it's almost like when you're in a session at school or work or whatever, and there's a question you're going, oh, I don't know if I should ask this. It seems like everybody already knows. And then you ask that question. People go, oh, I was feeling too vulnerable to ask that, but that's actually what I wanted to know. So I think it's the same kind of thing. It's a dialogue. I think people forget that with stand-up. It's not a monologue. It's a dialogue between you and the audience. And oftentimes they're not speaking back probably. They're laughing and smiling and clapping, but it's still a form of communication.
What contributed to that evolution, do you think, for you?
More confident, I think, just as you realize that you're funny, you know, like the way that you put things. It's just funny. A friend of mine left a voice memo for me or voicemail last night, and she laughed through the whole thing just based on my greeting that I don't think is really all that funny. And I'm saving her message. I told her, I'm like, I'm going to keep this forever because all you did was laugh through it, and I really didn't even say anything. And she goes, well, you're just funny. And so when you realize that about yourself and you can talk about just anything, you could talk about anything and make it funny. And I don't know if I could take anything and make it funny, but I can take a lot of things and make them funny. And I think that is what separates usually a veteran from an amateur.
You are Indian American. How do you feel your cultural background has shaped your comedic voice or your approach to humor?
I think the biggest part of being Indian American and bringing that to the table is really the audiences themselves. Like I've gotten so much support from the Desi community at large in the United States and around the world. Even if you watched Aziz Ansari, Hassan Minhaj, they went very mainstream. But if you'd go to a show, 70-80% of the crowd is brown. And you're like, how is that possible? I know my white friends, black friends, they're all watching these shows, but your supporters are still going to be your people, you hope. And the people that are going to resonate the most with your content are going to be the people who have the same experience as you. And they want to see you do something different. They go to the doctor. If it's an Indian doctor, not a surprise. Indian engineer, not a surprise. That's all great and well and good and awesome. But when you see an Indian stand-up comic or an Indian actor, I mean, it got to the point now where I said this to my dad, and my mom when they switched channels off of a commercial and it had a brown person in it. I go, do you remember the 80s where like you were hoping for anything brown on TV? Like my dad was like, Paula Abdul. Abdul is almost like Indian, like it's Middle Eastern, but we're like stretching. Like Paula Abdul is not Indian, okay? But it was like the closest we could get. There's like a train documentary about India, and my dad would tape the whole thing on PBS, like, check out this train documentary. Now I was like, realize we've gotten so far down the path, we can switch the channel, be like, this isn't that good. I'm gonna switch the channel because you don't have to watch it. You're not under that kind of obligation because guess what? At the next commercial break, there'll probably be another Indian. Okay.
Like you mentioned, just seeing our faces on the screen, we're like, yes, 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 more of this. And we have to support, we need more people that look like us, taking up space, in these spaces.
And it takes more of us because we're thin. So we need like twice the number. I like to talk about personal stuff. I mean, I think my most personal show was my solo show about dating before I met Hersha and how bad I was at it. And it was very confessional, it was very vulnerable, and it was 100 minutes long. It was a lot to talk about, or maybe not talk about, and just my thoughts about the very few females that I had dated at that point. And I don't know, I think that was cathartic for not only the males, but also the females. The show actually seemed to resonate with women a little more than men because I think a lot of those shows, no matter where people are on the gender spectrum, comes off as screw the other gender. And that's not very interesting. Like, it could be funny to a point, but after a while, it becomes very one note because you're like, okay, so you're unlucky in love and you're just going to blame the other gender. Like, all men are this way, all men are that way, or all females are that way, all women are that way. And it's like, okay, but what about you? Like, what's your take in this? What's your responsibility in this? I think that's been my issue with some of the people on like Indian matchmaking, and I do the audio description for it, by the way. So if you watch the next season and turn on audio description, you'll hear my voice describe it. Crazy, right? Yeah, there's a whole separate piece of news in there, I know. It came through a friend of mine who's actually white and living in South America. And she goes, oh, I think you'd be great for this. And then she needed a female, and I roped a female friend of mine from India. So her pronunciation, actually my pronunciation in Hindi is pretty good at this point. But at that point, it was very interesting to come in and do the show and see it before it aired and whatever else and get caught up in the drama. But I think a lot of it to me, a lot of them, it's like, what do you bring to the table? It's not okay to just, people are like, oh, you're enough. It's enough for you. No, you're not enough, okay? None of us is enough. You have to try, okay? You have to put in an effort. Every time we hang out, I bring it. Like whether you're a friend, a business partner, a romantic, a date, whatever, I will bring it. Like, you can't just be like, well, I'm enough. No, you're not enough, okay? Like, show up, work, try to be funny, try to be interesting, try to be insightful, try to listen. You got to try to do those things. Otherwise, no, if you're going to be boring, I could just stay home and watch TV. Like, some people just go into it and they're not willing to change. That's what my show was about. Like, yes, I harbored some resentment and whatever, but it's like, okay, but I can't change everyone else out there. What can I do to adapt? And I think that to me, that was like to approach it comedically in a funny way, whatever. But then people peeled back the layers. They're like, okay, yeah, there are some things I can do differently. And, it's a process, man. I mean, none of us is perfect,
You've performed in many spaces for a wide range of audiences. How do you navigate the balance between making these cultural references, drawing from your experience as an Indian American, and making your material more relatable to diverse audiences?
I think going to India itself helped me because they would say that, they do their acts in Hinglish, where it's like, part Hindi, part English, or Tamil, or Telugu, or Rajasthani, or whatever it is. But it was interesting because they would do the setup of the joke in English and the punchline in Hindi. So I wouldn't get any of these jokes. To me, it would sound like three guys walk into a bar. To fir? Like, what happens? I'd have to go out with the comics afterwards to go to the bar to be like, what happened to the third guy? And then laugh 2 hours after the show was over because I'm like, now I'm finally getting the joke. So I think when you're doing your show for Desis, Indians, or anyone, like, understanding, are all of your punchlines about being Indian or Hindu or whatever, or like you're doing an accent or you're doing it in a foreign tongue or whatever it is? Okay, that's one approach, but not everything about me is Indian. Like, I follow the NFL. That has nothing to do with being Indian. I mean, I love, listening to hip hop. That really has nothing to do with being Indian, although maybe the Bhangra beat and whatever gets in there. But there are things that I do that really have nothing to do with my heritage. And so not everything you do has to tie to your Indianness, just like not everything has to tie to my maleness or my shortness or my baldness or whatever it is. There are all these different ways to define yourself. Understanding how many of your punchlines are really about being Indian versus like, no, just that happened to me because I'm just some dude walking down the street. I think that's a good way to analyze your act, to think about, okay, is it too ethnic? Are people really going to resonate with this, or are they going to miss it if they're not brown?
How do you gauge that? Is it just kind of where you're performing, or how do you know? How do you know to kind of toe the line and strike that balance?
I mean, obviously, if it's getting a laugh, go with it. I mean, that's ultimately what's funny. Like, I mean, there's Ellen DeGeneres has this great bit where she talked about, I think it's in her 2003 special Here and Now, over 20 years old, which is hard to believe, but it's very stream of consciousness. And she talks about how, some people don't know how to kid. They'll be like, nice haircut. I hope you didn't pay for that. I'm just kidding. Really? You're just kidding? Because then both of us should be laughing. I don't think you know how to kid. And it's true because people will say something really mean. The whole idea of being a comedian is that, like, Don Rickles or any of these people would make you feel good because they were including you. And that's what Russell Peters is so good at. Like, that's how he would show that he loved you, is he would just rip on you and you were in on the joke. But if you weren't in on the joke and it missed, then you're kind of like, I just feel like crap now, and everyone else is laughing, but I'm not. So it's important to be able to see if you're laughing, if the crowd is laughing, and are you just kind of putting your people down to get a laugh? Because in this day and age, that's kind of not. It was 80s, 90s, zeros, even part of the 10s. It was like, okay, let me just do the accent, or let me make fun of Indians to white people or to black people, and people can laugh at us. It's like, comedy's evolved now, man. Like, you got to evolve with the times. It's okay to do a little bit of that, to be self-deprecating, but at the end of the day, it's like we should all be laughing at this together. An auntie had posted on one of my Facebook posts early, and she was one of the aunties that would just squeeze your cheeks, and she was always smiling. And it was just really funny because she goes, Beta, you're giving away all of our secrets. And it was in jest, but it was also like, that's interesting. Like, some of this stuff is just for us. And where is that space for us to debate and talk, where now people are going, well, should we have our own channel or own whatever? But now we've permeated the mainstream that our people like it if it's co-signed by broader society, because we're the Surgeon General. We were the nominee for Democratic president. We have that mainstream success that, like, doing your own thing is fine, but if broader society signs off on it, I think that the AC community is like, we're successful. Let's talk about this in broad daylight.
Right. In our culture, we're encouraged to be doctors, lawyers, tech CEOs. There's a ton of them now. You're among the South Asian trailblazers that went against the grain. You even pivoted from a corporate job to pursue comedy. Given your success and experience, what advice would you give those, especially those from similar backgrounds, who might want to pursue a creative career?
Love how you frame that up, Sangeeta, because I do a talk now called Gruntled, and it's all about finding happiness in your professional and personal life. It's called A Comedian's Take on Happiness. And that's actually how I defined it. I gave a speech and a workshop, a 3-hour workshop. It was primarily to South and East Asians. Mine was very much in the first person. It was all about me. I think people want to hear the story of being successful in corporate America and having the job, working in marketing at Procter & Gamble, having the girlfriend, having the car, having the house, and then going, you know what, I'm 30, I don't want to do this rest of my life. I don't want to live in the suburbs, don't want to live a normal life. I'm going to move to LA. And then actually achieving more personal than professional success out here in the end of the day. I mean, I'm happy with my career, but like just having a beautiful wife, beautiful son, beautiful house. Like, I'm so grateful, knock on wood, thank God, touch wood, that we've landed in a good spot. And I think, what are those skills that are transferable from working full time in a 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or wherever people work these days to a creative pursuit? A lot of it is perspective, I think. And, sometimes we don't need to do something different. We need to do what we're doing differently. Like, I remember when I worked at Wright Pat Air Force Base, and I was working an hourly job, and I liked it, but there were large swaths of the week I felt that were fairly miserable. I'm like, okay, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. Work in a lab, it's very slow paced, and God bless all the people who are still there. But man, I did some analysis and I was like, you know what? I think I'm only miserable from 2 to 4 p.m. weekdays. I think that's the painful part for me. Like, the weekends are fine. And actually, the mornings somehow, even though I'm not a morning person, I was like, they're not that bad. Somehow they kind of go fast, and it's lunch, and then you get back to your desk, and then you have your meeting, but 5 o'clock feels really far away, and it was really 2 to 4. And I go, okay, so you're miserable for only 10 hours a week? That's not bad. What can you do to spice up 2 to 4? I'm like, I'm going to grab a cup of chai at like 2 o'clock and then maybe drink a Coke at 3 o'clock. It's weird. It's such a simple fix, but all of a sudden those hours felt a lot better just on base of this anticipation of this very small thing, like drinking some chai or drinking a Coke or something. And I found that I got a lot happier just because I fixed the pain point in my life. It wasn't about doing everything different. It was about doing what I was doing differently.
What are your thoughts on how South Asian comedians, actors, musicians, artists can support and uplift one another?
I think watch our stuff, come to our shows. I think that is happening within the community. You know, people showing up to these Indian events is really important because obviously without a crowd, there can't be a show. And I think without ratings, those shows aren't going to stay on TV either. And I think a lot of people do collaborate with each other, and I think that's great. I think one caution I would offer to the point about keeping it interesting where it's negative versus positive is not to chase collaborations or things with people just because they have a lot of followers on social media. It's to be like, oh, I find this person very interesting. And even if the person isn't super successful on social media, or I remember reading this book about stand-up comics and, you know, the journey of all these people, and a lot of them I had never heard of. And I was like, well, I'm going to skip that chapter because I don't know who this person is. I found those chapters about journeymen just as interesting as the ones about the superstars. I thought they were still very fascinating. Like, even if they didn't become really successful, they still had a lot to share, and they were still pursuing their dream or whatever they were doing. So I think trying to find those artists out there and just commenting on their Facebook posts, on their Instagram posts, on their TikToks and whatever, that goes a long way. It is very uplifting when people are like, hey man, I just really enjoyed this video. That keeps you going. It's just about making sure that what you're saying is resonating and you're not just shouting into the void.
Right. Are people, watching? Are they listening? Are they connecting with it? You've worked with some big names in comedy. You've worked with comedians like Russell Peters, Kevin Nealon, Joe Coy, Dave Chappelle. Is there any comedian or mentor you admire most? What have you learned from them?
I admire all of those men a lot, and people like Maz Jobrani and people like that who have given me a lot of advice, but certainly Russell Peters. And the day that I found out Dave Chappelle thought I was funny, that pretty much sealed it for me. I'm like, wow, that is great. You were asking about how you can get, the confidence to talk about various things. It's like, well, that'll help. If the funniest person on the planet thinks you're funny, that helps. So it's like if somebody compliments you, someone really stylish says, wow, I like your outfit. You're like, oh, wow, that person likes my outfit. Like, they're like a fashion icon. That's incredible. Thank you. I'm glad you like that. So a lot of what they've had to do to get to that point is incredible. And I think when they are down to earth and they are willing just to have a conversation comic to comic, I mean, I went to the green room at Bill Maher, and we ended up talking for quite a while, and a mutual friend introduced us, and he said afterwards, he goes, he really liked you. Like, he doesn't talk to people for more than 2 minutes. And I go, why do you think that is, besides the fact that I'm just amazing? And he goes, you talk to him sort of comic to comic, like you were commenting on his stuff, and he doesn't like when people fanboy. And I was like, I was afraid I was doing that. He goes, no, you spoke to him like you would speak to him at the comedy club. Like, oh, I like this one bit you did, and this is what was funny about it, and whatever, in a way that was more approaching it as a comic and not a civilian of like, oh my God, that was just so good. It's like, oh, this is why it was so funny. And he really liked that, because who doesn't want to be complimented specifically, again, by someone who understands what they're doing, like the behind the scenes making of the sausage. I think that's been really great, that most people I've met in comedy, most of the comics, especially at that level, have been pretty nice. Almost all have been very, very generous with their time, and I think that's pretty cool.
Our audience hopefully knows by now, you are performing in Houston on February 2nd. Have you performed in Houston before?
I have. I've done the Laugh Stop. Mo Amer had connected me over at that comedy club. I performed there. It was a lot of fun. It was a number of years ago. I believe I performed at a Pratham USA gala in front of about 900 people there. So I've done Houston here and there, but not a full 90-minute stand-up show. That I've not done.
Yeah, Houston has a very vibrant and diverse community, especially with its large South Asian population.
Every time I perform in Texas, it's special because that's my wife's state. I love Texas. I fell in love there. I got married there. Texas has a very special place in my heart, and she loves Houston. She's the one who had shown me around and, shown me the waterfall, shown me where she used to work. And, I was like, this is cool. I'm happy to be there. It's got a special connection. We've got a very special connection to it. I definitely have very strong ties to Houston.
I know you did Make Chai Not War, funded by the U.S. State Department, which is wild.
At least something to be sponsored by the U.S. government to go perform in 7 cities across India. I mean, the audiences were about 1,500 to 2,000 people, and it was a blast. I mean, I've now performed in 11 states in India. I think I was the first person ever to do an hour of stand-up in India. I think I can make that claim. I don't think anyone had done that long of a set. And this was actually before Make Chai Not War. That was in 2009, and then I went back in 2012 for Make Chai Not War. I went back again through the U.S. government a few years after that to do a solo thing. I think it was just 2 shows that time. But it is amazing to find that you're getting a check from your own government to perform. And I do have to give the government a lot of props. They didn't really censor us.
What type of reception did y'all receive when you were there?
People loved it for the most part. I mean, it went over very well because I think it's weird being Indian and not being Indian, right? You're ethnically Indian, but not nationally Indian. And so you're going in there, and it's the hardest line to walk because you're not really one of them. And it's weird that they're looking at you and they're like, yep, you're brown and whatever, but you talk different. That's weird. You don't need to talk like it's a totally foreign land, but then you have to walk this line where you don't live there either. And so it is. It's the hardest kind of performance you'll have to do.
How did you kind of toe that line?
Concept of calling it Make China at War and being the country that has gone to war more than any other country was a contradiction. I mean, somebody did ask that at a show, and it caught us off guard, but it was also like a very fair point, I think. And so, again, because it is a declarative statement, make China not war. It's a full sentence where you're telling people what to do or what not to do when you're coming from a very bellicose nation. There's my dollar word. And so I just felt like that was a good point. But then every now and then somebody would ask a question where somebody asked, what's it like performing for a company versus, a ticketed event, where at a company, everybody knows everybody, and at a ticketed event, nobody knows anybody. And we're like, wow, that's a really insightful question. We never thought about that before. And none of us, Hari, Azhar, none of us had thought about that. But it was interesting to be like, yeah, at a company, at a corporation, at an office party or something, the humor's totally different because it's good to do personalized humor about people in the office because that's what's going to resonate.
And you were funded again for another show.
It was a similar kind of thing. They were like, come speak at this all-girls college and then go do the embassy. The all-girls college was very interesting. They said all girls. I would have called it all women because they were over 18. But all-girls college, and there were about 500 young women. That's different too because, you're an older man on stage in front of young women. Your tone is very different. I mean, your content could be very similar to what you do. I do family-friendly humor. But you're going to do stuff that's going to be super, super duper clean. And then after that, my organizers were just like, you can go way edgier than that at the embassy. I remember I spoke at a high school, and I don't think I could tell this actual joke now, even though ironically, I was in a crowd of 3 classrooms, and I was giving a talk on humor, and a kid asked, what's the funniest joke you ever heard? And I said, well, I can't say the funniest joke I've ever heard because it's not appropriate for high school. He said, no, come on, and all the kids were like, come on, come on, come on. Or like 17, 18 years old. And all 3 teachers were like, you can say it. I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, like, I don't think it's appropriate. And I don't want any tears. Like you said, go for it. And I asked like 3 times, and they were like, you can say it. And I did. And it got a huge laugh. But I dodged a bullet. I don't think I would do it today. It's just, hey, you said you wanted it. I gave it to you, and there it is. How bad could it be? Hey, I'll tell it on stage at this show. That's good promo for the show. What was the joke that Rajiv told in front of high school students by permission? What was the joke? The inappropriate joke. I will tell it.
So what's next for you, Rajiv? Any upcoming projects or big plans on the horizon?
I just recorded I Am Indian American. We're super excited to put that out. It was fun to record. I'm happy to put it out in the world, and it'll be out by well before the show that we're doing on the 2nd of February, Groundhog Day in Houston. And more episodes of my show will come out. What do you bring to the table? My interview show of South Asians. Look for clips on Instagram at Funny Indian. And the Tangent Show is my podcast that I do, and mostly audio, and it's not necessarily people who are only South Asian, not necessarily people who are only in entertainment, etc. So there'll be more episodes of that dropping, writing more stand-up, and yeah, I think I'm really excited about this upcoming show. I'm working on a TV pilot. We're in the final stages. We did a table read, and then I've got my speaking career where I talk about happiness. So yeah, I'd say there's a lot going on.
So what do you bring to the table? What's just with South Asian guests?
Yeah.
That's really exciting. What kind of spurred that project?
I wanted to showcase our people, and I felt a documentary was too static. Like a documentary is one and done, sits on the shelf. I'm like, a talk show is a living, breathing thing that when you bring new people in, like Avantika Vandanapu, when you bring in the Surgeon General, when you bring in Zarna Garg, all these people who are gaining more and more prominence, it's so fun to showcase them on your show because, again, it feels like it's in the zeitgeist and it's continually unfolding.
So what's your mission with that?
My mission with What Do You Bring to the Table is to showcase our community. I think the broader Desi community and seeing all the strides that we're making. I think that's really, really cool to see.
Well, thank you so much, Rajiv, for taking the time to chat with us today. It's been great learning from you and having such a great conversation. We are looking forward to seeing you perform live on February 2nd here in Houston at Zilka Hall at the Hobby Center. Get your tickets at IAAHouston.org. And before we go, what can our audiences expect from your show on February 2nd?
Laughter. I hope a lot of laughter. That's the idea. I'm going to be doing stand-up, but I'm also going to be showing videos. I'm going to do some readings. It's going to be a whole hodgepodge of things, but of course the through line is going to be humor. So show up, humor in Houston. It should be a lot of fun on the 2nd of February, 2025.
It's going to be a memorable show. For all of you listening, don't miss out. This will be a great night of comedy and an opportunity to connect with our community. So thank you again, Rajiv, and we can't wait to see you on stage.
See you soon, Sangeeta. Take care if you want.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Sangeeta. It was a lot of fun to talk to you, and I feel like I gained a friend, so that's always nice.
Same here. This was super fun. I feel awesome. Thanks so much,
Okay.
Rajiv.
Take care.
Nice talking
All right.
to
Have a
you.
great week.
Bye.
Rest of your weekend.
You
Okay.
too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.